Uh, all right, let's go ahead and get started. We have been on dealing with difficult people. All right, how do we deal with difficult people? We're going to talk about irresponsible people this morning. How do you deal with irresponsible people? All right, and hopefully you are not one of those irresponsible people. But the Bible tells us, right? In verse number 19, verse number 20 of James chapter 1, wherefore, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath, for the wrath of man worketh not the righteousness of God. I'll give you a couple of verses that we're going to be looking at this morning. We're going to look at 2 Thessalonians chapter 10, verses 10, 11, and 12. For when we were with you, this we commanded you, that if any would not work, neither should he eat. For we hear that there are some which walk among you disorderly, working not at all, but are busybodies. Now, them that are such, we command and exhort by our Lord Jesus Christ, that with quietness they work and eat their own bread. We're also going to look at Proverbs chapter 10 this morning. Oh, I did not advance through those, did I? Proverbs chapter 10 this morning, verse number 4. He becometh poor that dealeth with the slack hand, but the hand of the diligent maketh rich. And then lastly, Romans chapter 12 and verse number 18. If it be possible, as much as lieth in you, live peaceably with all men. So how do you live faithfully around people who are not necessarily faithful, right? Or not necessarily responsible? It's not an easy thing to do, right? In your head, right? Picture this, right? A guy's trying to row a boat across a river, but the other people in the boat aren't paddling, right? But worse than that, not only are they not paddling, they are dragging their oars in the water, right? Trying to slow down all the progress. That's what it feels like when you got to live around or with people who are irresponsible. Right? Or you're trying to work with somebody who's irresponsible, or maybe, right, you're even trying to help them. You're trying to minister to somebody that's irresponsible, right? You're pressing things forward, right? And they are holding things back, right? It's difficult to deal with, right? And there are certainly people like that, right? Irresponsible people will drain time. They will drain your energy, and obviously, they drain your patience, right? Make you want to kill them, right? That's just kind of the way it is, right? But as Christians, right, we're called to deal with all sorts of people, and we are certainly called to deal with people who are irresponsible, right? And when we deal with them, in all of our dealings with others, we want to honor God. Right? And when others don't carry their weight, how do you honor God in the way that you behave, right, around them, or the way that you work your way through the process with those types of people? It's very difficult to do, right? I think everybody in here can probably think of somebody in your life, right, that is this way. If you can't think of somebody presently in your life, you can certainly think of somebody over the course of your life, right? That is this way. You're trying to make progress, and they are not in favor of progress, right? This type of stuff takes place in churches, right, on a regular basis. I've been in and around ministry for a long time, and right, a lot of people, right, we all have heard the phrase, right? Stick in the mud, that kind of stuff, right? A lot of people, right? They are not, in their mind, they don't think that they're trying to inhibit progress, right? And so they are just, right? Well, we're just trying to keep things the same, right? And that kind of thing. But there is certainly people who inhibit the progress of a church, right? I worked with Pastor Johnston for a long time, and in a few different ministries, right? El Centro, San Antonio, and here, right? And every time that a church starts to grow, there are people who, right, anchor in, right, and say, nope, like we're not going like that. Right? Me and Pastor Myrick were talking about it earlier. I think it was either this week or last week, but we were talking about Pastor Johnston always had a giving campaign going, right? There was always something on the wall in the back, right? And if you gave, you could put a brick on the wall, or right, a leaf on the tree, or right, whatever it was. Pastor Johnson was always in the middle of a giving campaign of some type. Right, that was one of his things. There was people who came to the churches that Pastor Johnson was a part of, and they absolutely hated that stuff. But right, finances are what carry a church forward, right? And there is a lot of irresponsible people that go to churches, right? And they attend, right? And they benefit, but they choose not to participate, right, in giving or participate in reaching people, right? That was the other thing Pastor Johnson was constantly doing, right? Constantly had soul winning campaigns of some type going on, giving away a Bible or this or that for people who brought people to church, right? And there were people who would come and say, well, that's, that's disingenuous, and this is a carnival. All right, that was what Pastor Johnson was constantly accused of, was being the circus church, right? And Pastor Johnson would have monkeys hanging from the chandeliers if people would come to church to see it, right? That did not bother him, but he was constantly accused of being that as well, right? And there were people who would dig in, right? Say, that's not the way to do things. That doesn't, we don't like that kind of stuff, right? But he was constantly trying to bring people in, right? And so there are people who are irresponsible in your life, right? I have found that I've been relatively successful, right, in the area of building my own business. And there are people who, as soon as you start to grow a little bit, they start to anchor in and want to draw you back. Right? They don't want you to be successful. And so all of us deal with irresponsible people. Some of them knowingly irresponsible, and they're being irresponsible in an effort to hold you back. Some of them unknowingly irresponsible. It's just part of their personality, right? It's a behavior trait that they have. And so, but we all deal with irresponsible people in some way. The first thing you have to do, right, in dealing with irresponsible people is you've got to recognize right, the danger of enabling that type of behavior. In 2 Thessalonians, where we just were, chapter 3, verse 10, he says, "For even when we were with you, this we commanded you, that if any would not work, neither should he eat." Paul's statement is very simply this: don't enable somebody who is irresponsible. It is irresponsible for you to enable their irresponsibility. Right? It's one of the problems that we have, in my opinion, right, culturally within the United States of America right now, is that we have taken to being irresponsible on behalf of irresponsible people. We're spending money on people who are not responsible, and all it has gotten us is more irresponsible people, right? And so irresponsibility is not a personality trait, right? It's a pattern of choices that you make. That is really what it is. And Paul addresses that, right, by telling you, hey, they're making a choice not to work. You need to make a choice not to feed them, right? That's Paul's recommendation, right? This stuff is not popular, but it is reality, right? Irresponsibility is never treated casually in Scripture, right? It is always corrected in Scripture. Nowhere in the Bible you find God saying just deal with it, put up with it, right? You'll never find that in Scripture. You're always going to find irresponsibility being corrected, whether it's in the Old Testament, right? Aaron, anybody, right? Irresponsible, like the picture-perfect child for irresponsibility, right? Did God just say, oops, right? No, right? God corrects that type of stuff, right? All through Scripture, God corrects that type of thing, right? Lot would be another perfect picture of irresponsibility, right? And so, listen, the reality is grace does not require us to subsidize people who are lazy, right? It is not grace. Grace doesn't say you have to finance laziness, right? Often that's kind of our attitude towards it on a regular basis. Is we get this idea in our head that, right, we have to subsidize this thing, right? We have to finance it because, if we don't, they'll starve, right? Is kind of the concept. but that's not a biblical concept, right? The biblical concept is certainly not that. The Bible does not require us to, in any way, right, to subsidize somebody's laziness. Grace is not a blank check for foolishness. It is great. What grace is calling somebody to live in a wise way. Right? Calling somebody into wisdom. That is what grace is. It is not grace for me to finance, right, your irresponsibility. We live in Southern California. A lot of obvious addiction problems, right? I don't think any of us would say, well, I have to go to the street corner and buy a meth. All right? I mean, they need it. Right? That's irresponsible, right? If you have an adult child and that adult child came to your house and said, Dad, look, I don't have enough beer money for the weekend. Right? You would not say to yourself, oh, well, here's $20. I mean, I don't want to be ungracious by saying, well, then don't drink. Right? None of us would do that. Right? And we would not think to ourselves how ungracious of a parent for not supplying beer money for their child. How ungracious of a parent for not supplying drugs for their child. None of us would think that. But it's the same thing when we act that way with finances towards people who are unwilling, right, to pursue excellence in their own personal life. That is irresponsible of us. Ask more of them, right? Grace says, I'll help you make it to the next step. That's what grace does. Grace says, look, I'll help you stop drinking. I'll help you, right, get out of your addiction problem. Grace says, I'll help you take the next step in your financial situation so that you can get a better job, so that you can make more money, so that you can supply and do better for your family. That's grace. But grace is not shelling out money, right? That is not gracious on our behalf. Grace doesn't require us to do that. Listen, when we allow others to dodge their responsibilities in the name of kindness, we create a deeper pattern of sin in their life. Nobody became an addict overnight. Most people were loved into being addicts. Most people were loved into being alcoholics. Most people, right? I'm not saying everybody, but most people, that's the way it happened, right? We don't want to subsidize that kind of thing. Love can look like, right, letting people face the consequences of their sin. Right? It doesn't mean that we produce the consequence, right? But we allow them to face those consequences. Right? Look at Luke chapter 15 real quick, right? Luke chapter 15, verse number 14 through verse number 17, right? This is talking about the prodigal son. And when he had spent all, there arose a mighty famine in the land, and he began to be in want. And he went and joined himself to a citizen of the country, and he sent him into the field to feed swine. And he would fain have filled his belly with the husk that the swine did eat, and no man gave unto him. Right? Verse number 17 says, and when he came to himself, he said, how many hired servants does my father's have bread enough and to spare, and I perish with hunger? Right? The father doesn't come to the pig pen. The father doesn't come to the pig pen and say, hey, you should have, let me fix this problem. Let's throw some more money at this problem. Let's throw some more resources at this problem. That's not the solution. Just was having this conversation with somebody actually this morning, right? Nobody can fix anything in your life. Full stop. Nobody has the answers. Nobody can fix it. You have to want it. And if you don't want it, it doesn't matter how many resources people throw at it. It's not going to change. listen, addicts, people who are addicted to drugs, right? We've got 4 kids that we've adopted out of the foster care system, right? You know why their parents end up having to give them up, right? Because they have a burning desire for something that trumps their burning desire for their family. Most of the time, by the time that they end up in that position, the burning desire for whatever it is, alcohol, drugs, or whatever it may be, right? Or a lifestyle that is not, that isn't conducive for raising children in, right? By the time that they reach the point where they've lost their children, this is so embedded by people who have been irresponsible in holding them accountable that you can't get it out of them. And so they end up losing everything. And you would not believe the amount of money that our government throws at resources to try to fix the problem and can't fix it. You know why the government can't fix it? They will give them job training. They will provide them with housing. They will give them money. They will do so much. It's insane. If they're addicted to drugs, they will provide rehab. They will provide finances for when they get out of rehab. They throw so much money at it and they can't fix it. You know why? Because nobody can fix it except for you. At some point, you have to let people who are irresponsible be accountable and face the music. And you know as well as I know that that's the only way that you've ever grown over the course of your life is accountability. You finally had to look at yourself in the mirror and say, it's just me, right? There is one common denominator in every problem I have ever faced in my life. You know what the common denominator is? This cat. He's the problem. He's got to change, right? And it's irresponsible to point to something else as being the source of the problem, whether it's in your life or in somebody else's life. That is irresponsible to allow somebody to do that. Right? And it is listen, I understand, right, that it's very difficult to hold people who don't want to be accountable. Because none of us like to look at somebody and go, no, you're lying. But people lie. Right? The person who tells you, no, I have to have alcohol to make it through, right, my day, is lying. There are people who reach that point, right, where to get them off the alcohol will actually kill them, right? There's documented cases. There's actually a documentary that I watched a long time ago about it, but, right, there are people that reach that point, but 90% of the people who are telling you that, man, they couldn't live without alcohol are lying. They can. They don't want to, but they can. Right? And there's 100 other drugs that go along with that kind of thing, right? And alcohol is a drug. Technically, alcohol is a poison, but, right? But listen, the reality is, right, you have to, at some point, make people face themselves and be accountable. And if they won't be accountable, you can't be accountable for other people. You just can't. I can't be accountable for you. You can't be accountable for me. Only you can be accountable for you. I can't show up to work for you. Right? You have to show up at work. That's called accountability, right? Same thing in all sorts of other areas. In your marriage, I can't show up as a husband for your wife. I can't show up as a wife, right, for a husband, right? I can't make your wife better. I can't make your husband better. I can't do any of that kind of stuff. They have to be accountable, right? You've got to be accountable. You have to hold other people accountable as well. Set boundaries that promote growth, right? He says in 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, verse 11 and verse number 12, right? For we hear that there are some which walk among you disorderly, working not at all, but are busybodies. He says, now them that are such we command and exhort by our Lord Jesus Christ that with quietness they work and eat their own bread. Right? What's he telling them to do? He's telling them, hey, you need to set some healthy boundaries here, right? To hold people accountable. Promote some things, right? Listen, avoid covering for behavior that God refers to as disorderly. Right? Here's what irresponsibility often hides behind the mask of busyness. right? But it has a way, right? It's got a way of just spreading through things, right? Until it permeates everything. In fact, it's kind of like leaven, right? It doesn't take much irresponsibility to make all of your busyness equal nothing. And there are a lot of people who will do a lot of running around, right? And make a lot of different, right? Well, I just need to do this. If I was just on that program, if I just had this process, if I just changed this, right? People who want to lose weight and get in shape. How do you lose weight and get in shape? Well, you got to have this program. You got to have that program. You got to follow this guy. You got to follow that guy. You got to buy this. You got to buy that. No, you know how you do it? Eat less, work out more. That's how you do it. Right? It's not rocket science. Everybody's looking for a process. Everybody's looking for multiple things that they can do. And what they're doing is they're covering their irresponsibility and busyness. If you'll just give me some busy tasks to do, then I can say that I'm being responsible when in actuality I'm being irresponsible. Every single person that's ever worked at a real job sitting in this room right now has worked with somebody who covers their irresponsibility by looking busy all the time. They do nothing, but they're always doing something. Right? They can never do what they need to do because they're doing something else. Right? Listen, that kind of stuff takes place. We do it, right? We do it as well, right? But listen, it leads down, right, dangerous paths when you act that way. Right? It leads down dangerous paths when you allow people around you to act that way. Because eventually, somebody has to care for the farm animals, right? So if you allow other people, right, to, well, no, but I'm sweeping the dirt, right? What are you doing? Well, I'm sweeping the pasture. All right, well, yeah, but we have animals that need to be fed and we've got stalls that need to be cleaned out. Well, I'll get to that as soon as I get done sweeping the North 40. Right? Well, yeah, they're not doing anything of benefit, right? And listen, it's a bad way. Listen, this is a bad, it happens with parents and their children. Parents train their children to be irresponsible and then wonder why their kids are so irresponsible. I can think in my mind right now of families I have known over the course of my time in ministry, some of which the mom washed their clothes, the boys' clothes, folded their clothes, made their beds for them, cleaned their rooms for them. I know. No, I'm not talking about 4-year-olds. I'm talking about 16-year-olds. Right? She may as well have wiped their butt for them and brushed their teeth. You're training irresponsibility. Right? As you progress in life, you should become more and more responsible, not less and less responsible. And listen, as parents, it's our job to raise our children to become more and more responsible. That's why we hold our children accountable. When we tell them no and they continue to do something, we hold them accountable. Why do we hold them accountable and say, no, you're not going to do that. I'll pick you up. I'll sit you down in a chair. It's not going to happen. You're not going to just go your own way and do your own thing, because allowing kids to go their own way and do their own thing is irresponsible. It's not the kid's fault. It's our fault, but it's irresponsible for us to let them do that. And our irresponsibility will transfer as irresponsibility into their lives as well. Listen, this stuff happens in families. This stuff happens in workplaces. It happens in churches. Right? And pretty soon, nobody's responsible for anything. And listen, when nobody's responsible for anything, that is the demise of culture and society. Right? Look at what's happening with American politics. Is anybody responsible for the debt? Nope. Well, I was before my time. Well, it was before my time. Well, it was before my time. Well, it was before my time. I can't undo it. I can't undo it. I can't undo it. I don't know what to do about it. I don't know what to do about it. I don't know what to do about it. I know, throw more money at it. That's irresponsible. We're walking down this irresponsible path towards a dead end. Eventually, we're going to go off the cliff. It's inevitable. It has to happen. Because you can't continue to act in irresponsible ways and expect that you're going to get a responsible result. You can't do it in your marriage. If you're a husband sitting in this room, you can't act in irresponsible ways towards your wife and expect that your marriage is going to be great. You're not going to get a responsible result from acting irresponsibly. You have to act like a responsible adult towards your wife. You can't just say whatever you want to your wife. Listen, I watch this stuff with husbands and wives all the time. Husbands and wives will say the most insane things to each other. Call each other the most insane names. And then later be like, oh, my bad, I was just upset. No, what you were was you're irresponsible. That's what you are. Take some accountability. You weren't upset. You said something you shouldn't have said. Own it and fix it. And you don't get to say, oh, I'm sorry I was upset, and then 2 weeks later, oh, sorry I was upset, and then 2 weeks later, oh, sorry I was upset. No, at this point you've developed a pattern. You're not upset. You are a bad individual. And you need somebody to knock you in the back of the head and fix your thinking. Look, irresponsibility will never lead to responsible results. It doesn't work in marriage. You can't act irresponsibly towards each other. It doesn't work with your kids. You can't act irresponsibly towards your kids. You are responsible, especially when they're this big. You are 100% responsible for their actions. As they grow, you're supposed to transfer responsibility from you to them for their actions. Right? By the time that they are 16, 17, 18 years old, you should have transferred complete responsibility to them. They are completely responsible for their actions now. But often what happens is, nope, we just keep on holding on to responsibility because it makes us feel better about ourselves. But you're feeling better about yourself, you're doing it in an irresponsible way. Listen, it happens in workplaces. All of us have experienced it in the workplace, right? Somebody who who you probably said something to your superior, they aren't cutting it. They're not doing the job. You probably said it in their probationary period, and now they're past it, and now they can't get rid of them. And it was because that boss wouldn't act in a responsible way. Happens all over the place. Right? It doesn't take much to corrupt the whole thing. Right? Redirect people rather than rescuing them. Paul instructs the idle in the passage, right, to work and eat their own bread. Right? He's telling the church there, hey, help them take responsibility. Help them get to work, and then they can eat their own bread. Right? It's the old adage of, right, you catch a man a fish, right? You feed him for a day. You teach him how to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. Right? It's the same concept. You can't feed your kids for the rest of your life. You can't take care of them for the rest of their life. At some point, they're going to have to take responsibility for themselves. Right? At some point, you've got to stop saying, well, if my husband would just do this, I want to act like this. If my wife would just do this, I want to act like this. At some point, you're going to have to take responsibility. Right? Listen, that's Paul's advice, because boundaries invite repentance, not rejection. When you set up boundaries, you know what happens? You don't have to reject people. You don't have to, right? You don't have to constantly tell people, that's not acceptable, that's not acceptable, that's not acceptable. When you set up boundaries, you can stop saying it pretty quick. Doesn't take long before your kid knows. All right? You can ask all of my kids, right? All of my kids know, right, that there's a point at which, right, I'm done. And whatever comes after that is not going to work out in their best interest. Right? They all know, right? Most of my kids, I can give them a look and they know they better fix it. Right? That didn't start by me just giving the look. Right? The look was followed by something. Right? And there's a boundary there now that they know of. I'm not supposed to go over this boundary. It's not that they never cross that boundary anymore, but I don't have to go and tell them what's going to happen once they cross that boundary. They know what's going to happen. Right? That's what boundaries do. Listen, Truth without grace is mean, and grace without truth is meaningless. Listen, it's not a lack of grace. I'm not calling for a lack of grace in holding people responsible, right? He says in Galatians chapter 6, verse 5, Paul says, "For every man shall bear his own burden." You know what Paul's saying? I'm here for you, but I'm not going to carry your burden for you. Right? You've got to get in the yoke. I will help you carry your burden, but I'm not going to do it all. That is not going to happen. Right? And listen, there is plenty of people, right? Most of us had made the mistake, right, of carrying somebody else's burden for them. Right? You shouldered it. You let them out from underneath the weight of it, and now you're carrying it, and you can't give it back. You know why? Because they already know what it feels like to be under there, and they don't want to be under there. So yeah, you know what they're going to do? They're going to let you carry it. I watch this with parents of adult children all the time. Their adult child refuses to work consistently and keep a job, so their kid lives at home, right? And the parents hold them responsible for nothing. Mom and dad are still paying for absolutely everything, and the kid's a complete mess. I mean, they're a complete mess. Right? And what has happened is the parent said, "I'll carry this burden for you." And the kid said, "Okay." And now the kid doesn't want the burden back. But the only thing that will make you grow, that causes the things that will cause you to mature and make you grow, is responsibility, shouldering burdens. That's the only thing that does it. The only way to carry more is to carry what you presently have. And eventually you'll carry more, and eventually you can carry more than that. But listen, you've got to shoulder the burden. You don't get rid of a burden and then take another one on. That's not the way that life works. The way that life works is you shoulder what you've got, and you just continue to grow stronger and be able to carry more. That's how life works. It's not popular, but that is how life works. It's one of the things that apparently we have lost in our thinking. Is now we've got this concept that, okay, fine, I will take that on. But if I take that on, then I have to give this away. So I'm not going to do this anymore so that I can do this now. And what we've got is this exchange of burdens going on, and that's not life. Life is I carry what I have, and then eventually I'm able to carry more because I am responsible for this, and now I can be responsible for that, and now I can be responsible for that. Every single success, whatever, guru you want to talk about on the face of this planet, you know what every single one of them will tell you? If you want something done, you know who you go and ask to do it? Somebody who's already doing something. Because the guy that's doing nothing is doing nothing for a reason. The guy who is doing something is responsible, and somebody who is responsible can bear more responsibility. Listen, that's what we're called to do. We have to model diligence, right, with some consistency. That's what he tells us in Proverbs chapter 10, verse 4. He becometh poor, that dealeth with the slack hand, but the hand of the diligent maketh rich. The number one guarantee that you will be successful in life is not how much money you get paid or what job that you have. The number one guarantee that you will be successful in life is consistency. You show up consistently. It's the number one guarantee, all right? Listen, your example to your children speaks louder than your correction. Same thing at your work. It is the same thing in your marriage. People make commitments all the time. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that, right? You see them, if you have social media, you see it all over social media, right? I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. Why don't you stop telling people what you're going to do and go do something? I'm going to build a business. Why don't you go build one then? Instead of just telling everybody what you're going to do. Right? That's what responsible people do. Listen, lazy people will justify their ways, right, until they see fruit, right, in somebody else's faithfulness. Lazy people will continue to justify what they are doing and say, see, You're working hard and it's not working out for you. You're working hard and it's not working out for you. And then eventually what happens? You turn a corner and all of a sudden all your hard work starts paying off. And then what do they say? Well, yeah, easy for you to say. Yeah, easy for you to say. Yeah, easy for you to say, right? Listen, this happens. I've done a lot of marriage counseling over the course of my time, right, in ministry. And here's how it goes, right? You suffer to make it through marriage, right? But people will look. Me and Sarah have been married for, right, a long time, right? But right, they will. Here's what they'll do. They'll look and they'll say, "Well, yeah, that's easy for you to say." Right? You guys have been married for over 25 years now. It's easy for you to say. Yeah, guess what? At one point we were married for a year. And then we were married for 5. And then we were married for 10. That's how marriage works, right? We went through a bunch of stuff. We just decided we were going to stick it out. We were going to hang in there. Well, yeah, but you never had the spouse I have. Well, you just never had the wife I have. You never had the husband I have. No, you have the wife you have. You have the husband you have. And the only way that you get to stand up and say, hey, you know what? Like, we stuck it out and you reap all the benefits of staying married for a long time is that you stick it out. You take responsibility. That's how it works. Your example speaks louder than your words do. Diligence is both spiritual as well as practical, right? Paul works that out for him, by the way. Here's what Paul says in Acts chapter 18, verse 3, right? Paul says, he abode with them, right? He says, for by their occupation, he says, they were tent makers. Paul was of that same craft, right? You know what Paul did? Paul worked. That's what Paul did. He worked with his hands. In John chapter 17, verse 4, right? I have glorified thee on the earth. I have finished the work which thou gavest me to do. You know what Jesus did? He worked. Paul worked with his hand. Jesus was a worker who finished the work that God had given him to do. You know what work is? Work is, it's not just, having a good work ethic is not unspiritual. There's a lot of people that act like having a work ethic somehow, right, makes you unspiritual. Right, well, you know, you just care about money more than anything. You just care about success more than anything. That's usually spoken by somebody who is just jealous of somebody's accomplishments. Right? You can be spiritual and still have a good work ethic. You can be spiritual and still be smart with your money. Listen, you've got a responsibility, right? Your work ethic is a part of your testimony. Your success or lack of it in life is a part of your testimony. You ought to consider it, right? Don't grow weary of doing the right thing, right? We're told in Galatians chapter 6, verse 9, not to grow weary of well-doing, right? The irresponsible will mock people, right? And they'll do everything they can, right, to try to drain you. They'll ride your coattails, whatever, right? They'll do everything they can to hold you back, right? But in the end, you know what wins out every time? Consistency and faithfulness wins out every time. The number of things I've heard people say, right, about pastors I've known over the course of my life, from Pastor Howes, Pastor Johnston, right, the things that I've heard people say in an attempt to take influence or respect away from those individuals, right? The people who have spoke those words, people can't even tell you those people's names, but people remember those names, right? Why? Because those guys just stayed faithful, just hung in there, did what they were supposed to do, right? Listen, extend grace without compromising the truth. That's what we're told in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 15. Speaking the truth in love, right? Grace says, hey, you're loved, right? I love you, but the truth says you've got to change, right? Something has to be different here. You can't let resentment, right? You can't let resentment replace your mercy. Here's what happens. If you decide you're going to shoulder the load for somebody, all that's going to happen is eventually you're going to get bitter about the fact that you're carrying their responsibility. and you're going to ruin a relationship you could have with that person. This ruins relationships between parents and kids, right? This ruins the relationships between husbands and wives, ruins the relationships between employers and employees, right? It ruins it because you get bitter because you're tired of carrying their responsibility. The number of young people, right, that end up, right, the number of young people that end up killing their parents because they lived in a house with their parents and their parents were shouldering the responsibility for them their whole entire lives, never held them responsible for anything. And then finally one day the parent breaks and says, that's it, I'm done. I'm not financing you anymore. I'm not doing anything for you anymore. And you know what happens? The kid snaps and kills them because the kid can't handle responsibility. Menendez brothers, anybody? You realize that nobody in the Menendez brothers' entire network said that those parents had ever done anything to those boys. Those boys came up with an elaborate story of how their dad was abusive and all these other things. And that's why they killed their dad. Oh, and their mom, who they never accused of abusing them at all, but they killed her too. You know what happened? Parents shouldered the responsibility for him until finally the parents snapped and said, that's it, I'm done. And that made the kid snap. You can't bear responsibility for other people, right? Remember this. Remember, you've been shown mercy, so show people mercy. D.L. Moody said, we're all beggars showing other beggars where to find bread. Right? But notice, right, that the story that quote is based on, right, is in the Old Testament when the nation of Israel is besieged, right? The beggars come back into town and tell everybody there's bread out there. You know what the beggars didn't do? Didn't go get it all and bring it back into town. They said there's bread out there. Right? It's the same concept as the saying that we have, right? You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink, right? That's mercy. Mercy says, look, I will point you in the right direction. But truth says you've got to walk it. Right? That's what we're responsible to do. Listen, the conclusion is basically this, right? Grace is not a crutch. It's a compass to point people in the right direction. Irresponsibility should not be a defining factor for people of God. Right? So whoever it is in your life that is doing that, right? Remember this. Boundaries, love, and personal example are the way that you change that. You say, this is a boundary. You're not allowed to cross this. If you come across this, right, then this is going to have a negative effect on our relationship. Right? I'm not going to be ungracious towards you, and I'm not going to set the boundary so high that the standard so high that you can't reach it. Right? But there's got to be boundaries. Right? And I love you. Right? I love you, and so look at, right? I'm going to do I'm going to point you in the right direction. But I'm also going to show you by my personal example that irresponsibility is not acceptable. It's not acceptable in your life, and it's not acceptable in my life. Right? Listen, we're responsible. We should be responsible. We should not act in irresponsible ways. But we can be irresponsible if we react irresponsibly to people who are being irresponsible. Right? If you're allowing people in your life to act in ways that are irresponsible, you need to put a halt to it. You are not doing anything for them. I know that you think you love them too much to hold them responsible, but that is just false. Love is holding people responsible. And if the person is responsible, you know what a responsible person does when you hold them responsible? They accept it. Two responsible people don't have to agree on everything. But two responsible people can talk about what one or the other is responsible for and not lose their minds over it. Right? They can continue to be friends even when they disagree about something. But a responsible person doesn't go, well, I can't believe that you'd say something like that to me. I can't believe that you'd accuse me of something like that. Responsible people don't do that. Responsible people go, well, I didn't do that. Right? Or they say, hey, you know what? that happened, but that's not the whole story. Right? That's what responsible people do. We ought to be responsible people. All right, we'll close there. We'll be back in here in about 15 minutes.